It's actually not a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness. Maybe it never was, but now it certainly is not. And now we're faced with a different question: is what is it that stands in our way?
Terms and conditions. The Transsolar podcast for the Biennale Architettura 2025. Episode 3. Welcome back to the Transsolar podcast Terms and Conditions, which is named after the installation at the Architecture Biennale 2025 in Venice. In the first episodes, we explored the concept behind the project and how it can spark dialogues in architecture, science and beyond. The installation is a time journey through climate change that also draws attention to comfort, its requirements and side effects. And this is the starting point for today's episode. Today I'm joined by Dehlia Hannah, a philosopher of nature and associate professor of environmental aesthetics at the University of Copenhagen. Bilge Kobas, architect at the Technical University of Munich, focusing on comfort in architecture, and Daniel Barber, historian who examines the evolution of climate-responsive architecture. Welcome, Dehlia, Bilge, and Daniel.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi.
Now, comfort is a cultural phenomenon which impacts building practice. Historically, all over the world, people designed buildings that worked with, rather than against the local climates. But today, our building practice is catered towards user comfort defined in a very specific way by the technical regulations and standards. This has an impact on energy consumption and therefore on our climate. In the last 20-30 years, a lot of concepts and building products have been developed that give us solutions for comfort without the negative effects. Dehlia, have we been radical enough in how we communicate the deeper meaning behind all of this?
When I started working in this field, there was a sense that there was a big discourse about how it was hard to imagine climate change, that it was so big in scale, it took so long, there was so much data, the models were so complex. And there was this confidence among a lot of scholars, people in the media, that if only people could understand and really wrap their heads around this phenomenon imaginatively as well as scientifically, we would finally do something about it. And that spawned an incredible profusion of artwork, literature, sometimes known as climate fiction, and theory, thinking about what it would take to shift people's imaginations. And I think in the last not so long, maybe half a decade or so, there's been a very difficult truth dawning on myself and many of my colleagues and collaborators in this arena, saying, it's like, yeah, people know, and even the people who are denying the facts, they also know. It's not that many people will say, yes, we know climate change is happening, but it's not worth it to mitigate it, or we can't be bothered, or the roof will fall on someone else's head. It's actually not a lack of understanding, a lack of awareness. Maybe it never was, but now it certainly is not. And now we're faced with a different question: is what is it that stands in our way for accepting changes?
Exactly. And I think it's very important to convey the message. But Bilge, first, you were the leading designer of the installation in Venice. What are the experiences that you made when you saw the people, but also if you have a look to, let's say, the media or the reaction to the installation?
It looks like it's been received well, that we made our point, we made people feel the consequences of the way we're going right now, the world we're creating all together. But there's also this realistically pessimist side in me that thinks the second they leave the exhibition, the installation, it will be just another thing. It will be just another warning sign that we read everywhere, we heard about everywhere, but then I'm still not 100% confident that that message will stay with them on their daily practices.
That's a point that Dehlia mentioned. So coming back to you, Dehlia, what is hindering us?
I think that there's a need for something very different from what we usually want to do, which is we usually can accept incremental changes, turning the thermostat up or down a little bit, putting on a sweater. This has been the approach. It's been a kind of soft, it wouldn't hurt you, it wouldn't be too difficult to make the changes you need to make, and it would be better for the planet. That's been the kind of soft, enticing approach. And I think we have reached a point, or our environments, not only climate, but also many other environmental situations, have reached a point where actually what we need is much more radical change. And it's a change that will affect us in our everyday life, in our personal habits and conditions of comfort. And it would also need to be quite radical in a structural way, from infrastructure to economic changes. And that's something that's quite frightening to confront.
Mm. Daniel, what do you think would be, as Dehlia pointed on, what could be a way of pushing these things forward?
I mean, architecture, right?
Right. We're talking about building and construction. You see, once you said embrace climate as opportunity, not as obstacle.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. No, I mean, and I think in a way counter to much of what plays out in the rest of the Venice exhibition, right? I'm thinking architecture not as much in the kind of AI-generated robotic, solution engines, right? But rather as spaces for a different way of experiencing the world, and again, adaptive opportunities as a term that's used in kind of thermal comfort discourse, to think about, what about when you find a room that's more comfortable in the winter and you start to maybe build out the textiles and, have a different sort of heating relationship in a certain part of the house, or, figure out how to block the sun before it comes into the room with some external blinds, or just adjust your sort of habits and practices. But it's a dramatic transformation, that has to happen for sure.
From an historical perspective, of course, transformation, I think, has underestimated. The word is used in the last 5 years very often, but my feeling it's not understood how complex that really is, and what does it mean?
Well, I think there's a problem that there's inertia in the industry and in every industry for continuing to do things, and also to frame problems and then propose solutions in the same way. And this we run directly up against this question with respect to topics like green building or sustainable practices in architecture, because one of the most questionable practices is, of course, to build new buildings at all. And I'm reminded in this regard of a wonderful project by an artist and architect called Alex Schrader. And he has a project in which he does what he calls home renovations. But rather than tearing out, the existing infrastructure of, say, your apartment, he speaks to people about their life and how they inhabit their space. And then he actually comes to their house dressed up as them, and proposes ways performatively of inhabiting it differently. And I think this was not a practice directly conceived in relation to comfort, but I find it to be really an inspiration for thinking about what architecture could be. It might not only be building new things, but really looking for different ways of working within and inhabiting the existing infrastructure of our everyday lives.
What do you think about that, Bilge? You are an architect, and you, I think, have the same things in mind.
That actually reminds me, when we talk about adaptive comfort or different ways of using a building, we usually say the most adaptive part of any building is the humans, is the occupants. So the rethinking of the human behavior, which comes from a lot of social constructs today, is one of the biggest tools that we're not utilizing fully, in my opinion. We're still wearing suits to the office on a hot summer day. For some reason, someone invented it, we all accepted it, no one is questioning it. We still go to the work in this Victorian timeline. It's still 9 to 5. We still have half an hour, 1 hour lunch breaks. We completely ignore whatever changes, environmental shifts or cycles are happening in the outdoor world. We're just doing the same thing all day, every day. And we assume this applies to everyone. We're erasing all of the differences.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say, and also Dehlia, would you say we're in a kind of comfort trap? Is it necessary to unlearn comfort?
There's an initial sense in which change, what's uncomfortable is change. It's not to say everyone needs to be uncomfortable, but rather that we need to tolerate enough discomfort to find other pleasures. It's always the space of what aesthetics does, according to Nietzsche. It's the revaluation of values. We need to find different kinds of pleasures, different kinds of comfort. Comfort is only, within a small architectural context, thinking about comfort is, it seems like it's the only virtue, but valuing all kinds of discomfort, is something that we're all familiar with. Extreme sports, shock value. We're also looking to be shaken out of our comfort zones. We pay extra for that in all kinds of different spaces of media consumption, of entertainment. So I think that there's really a need to look more deeply into what comfort is a proxy for. In a way, the thermostat is a proxy for all kinds of simplified desires and habits and pleasures. And I don't think we really are that comfortable. I think we're becoming more like a snail that can't hold its body together without a shell. We're so dependent on these air conditioning systems and heating that forget to open the window or adapt in these very simple ways. I think that is actually very uncomfortable psychically and physically. We're hypersensitive to the most minor breeze going the wrong way.
But this is the whole one-click culture. So, if you need food, it's one click. You can get it delivered to your doorstep. If you need to buy something new, another ergonomic chair, there's a whole industry, billions, for you to sit better and longer. It's also one click. It can come to your doorstep, maybe the same day delivery. AC, also one click. So everything is one click. And then you don't have to think about what happens next. It's a very short-term mindset. And that's why we also had this terms and condition name. The wordplay was coming from that. Like, you never think of the consequences. You just click on accept, or you click on 18 degrees, click on next day delivery. That's it. As long as I get mine, I'm too comfortable being comfortable. And Dehlia is right. This is the world we are living in. And Martin, we were discussing, I find this hilarious that we are now sitting for such prolonged times, because that's the work culture. We have to pay to go to gym, to run on a moving surface going nowhere, and watching on a small screen in front of us National Geographic cheetah running. This is so funny. Explain this to any other species in the world, that you have to move. You have to push yourself to be uncomfortable, because the level of comfort you reached at is so unhealthy, so addictive. It's making you less and less independent. You're just becoming this blob of a thing. I think it's absurd.
Comfort and privilege are intertwined, you're right. But can you walk us through the fundamental shift here that you're advocating for?
One of the things that we're trying is to reverse the focus. So instead of trying to understand the limits of comfort, because we have a very specific comfort zone that we numerically define for architectural spaces. Instead of that, I think trying to figure out what's not that uncomfortable. So what you can tolerate for how long, at which parts of the day, it's for which kinds of bodies, because we talked about variability, understanding the tolerable discomfort or enjoyable discomfort or the absolutely needed comfort, but not the entirety of the time, which is the norm right now. So bringing several layers, nuances, and just flipping the focus back to discomfort is the starting point of my research. That's why I'm looking at the human body, how the human physiology responds to different thermal environments. And then the same flip kind of becomes also in the architectural design approach too. What if we went back to the outdoors and start from there again? What should we protect the human body from? from the outdoor climatic conditions. So instead of just creating this narrow, comfortable space, very tightly controlled. Control is also a very important topic. Instead of trying to control the natural cycles in a very specific situation, what if we expose people a larger variability that already occurs in the natural environment? What are the limits that we can just let things be? What if we let go of the control? Which is, I think, the hardest thing the modern human cannot do right now, letting go of the control. And I think this is something that stops a lot of architects, building engineers, because it's also established by the standards, right? If you go into the standards where this is described in a more specific way, it is said that the thermal comfort condition is where you don't essentially feel anything. You're not sweating, you're not shivering, you don't feel anything. It's the neutrality. It's actually not a positive thing. It really means you're senseless. Your body does not have to do anything, and you are completely, again, decoupled from your environment. That's actually the state that the building codes are trying to impose on the building engineers, architects. And we also know from research that the more you live like this, the more your body depends on mechanical cooling, the more you lose your natural capacity to actually tolerate different environments. So you become dependent on it. So we're trying to basically shift that understanding and flip it to the other side. What if we controlled only the things we really have to?
Absolutely, Bilge. This leads to the question, what could our perspective on comfort look like in the coming years? And what could a positive image for architecture in the future look like? What do you think, Dehlia?
I think this is where experience is the best teacher. And sometimes the experience has to be quite unfamiliar in order to make an impact. I'm thinking, for example, of an experience that I had by accident that I have been thinking about for 20 years, was being in New York City in 2003 during this enormous blackout along the east coast of the United States and Canada, reaching into half of the country. And there were many things that left a lasting impression about that experience, from the sociality of how people behaved during those conditions to the thermal change in the city. It was in mid-August, the middle of a heat wave, the worst time to be in New York by any stretch of the imagination. And at night, not only did we see the stars come out, but we could feel the urban heat island lifting. The heat went up, and it was not replenished by constant production of air conditionings and the flow of electricity through the cables underground. And that is not something that is very easy to convey, except
I understand,
through experience. So I think, looking for artists, curators, exhibition makers, architects, looking for ways to reframe experiences and maybe to intensify them or to frame the discussion around them so that we pay attention and learn interesting lessons from them, I think is a really crucial strategy. And not only building elaborate kind of artificial environments, but also looking to examples close to home and around the world so that we can start to notice different things. I think that's the only way to shift people's receptivity to the kind of abstract and proposal that you should just, let go of everything you used to.
Absolutely. And you've written a book, A Year Without a Winter, and I think this was the idea behind it, to reframe and to use a mixture of, let's say, historically inspired science fiction. Maybe I can try to describe in this word. It's a different way of explaining these things we are talking of, isn't it?
Yeah, I could say something very brief about that book, because I think it's always in the background of my thinking about exhibition making. The title, A Year Without a Winter, was of course, referring to the kinds of years that we have now. I didn't know that they would come quite so soon when I was working on the book a few years ago. Now it seems that every year is a year without a winter. But the title is a reference to something that happened 200 years ago. And there was a climate crisis that was remembered as the year without a summer. And it was caused by a volcanic eruption in Indonesia in 1815 that cast the whole world into a lowered temperature condition of 1 degree, which would be a great dream for us to achieve today in some ways. It was also the inspiration for solar radiation management techniques. So quite an event that had enormous impact, but it also had lasting cultural impacts. The novel Frankenstein was written during that period, as well as many other literary and cultural products. And so that project, that book, A Year Without a Winter, sort of posed the question of what happens in response to a kind of ambient awareness of a climate crisis. How do we register awareness of that historically, and how might we register awareness of that today? And I think the strategy that's worth maybe taking into other contexts is that in some cases, you don't have to build a situation, you have to just frame it. So scientists use this methodology of natural experiments where they look at what happened in society or in ocean chemistry or whatever when some kind of very big and unplannable change happened. And we can do that too. We can look to how people actually cope during heat waves, during blackouts, during floods, during fires. How are people coping already all around the world with conditions that people in privileged places or in Europe and the Americas find to be crisis, intolerable, uncomfortable conditions? Maybe there are already out there very good examples to learn from.
I agree completely, but still I stick to the idea that it's necessary to have also some kind of positive image because it helps people to orient themselves. Yeah. Do you agree or not?
I think so, but I think that a clear negative image and a clear positive image need to go together. And something that really came into focus for me at the Biennale, seeing our installation and thinking about it in the context of the rest of the exhibition, which was very much seeking a positive image, is that this is the excessive carbon consumption is the contemporary version of what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil after World War II. It's the kind of unthinking acceptance of the world order as you experience it, and you participate in it and just simply accept it. And it's the flick of the switch, it's turning the air conditioner up, it's all of the excessive forms of consumption that are so habitual, that are so well-meaning. Even all of us at the Biennale, when we got hot during the installation or giving tours, showing it to our esteemed colleagues, we cooled off on the little stage where the real cool was blowing. And I think that to recognize that kind of behavior as not lazy or just inadequate, but actually maybe really as the embodiment of a practice of evil, of having this direct impact. I think that that's a negative image that's hard for me to look myself in the mirror and recognize my own practices that way, but very important. And it puts into perspective what would be wanted from a positive image. And I don't have a global positive image, but there are certain things like treading, a lifestyle in which one takes pleasure, but also treads more lightly upon one's immediate and global community. Actually, maybe we need much less than we're in the habit of thinking. If we could just take the time to appreciate and enjoy what we have at our disposal, maybe then we don't need the air conditioners and the lights and the elevator, etc. And I think that's maybe the direction of what a positive image would look like. Not just taking away, but taking more pleasure in what we have at our disposal.
Mm. Daniel, what do you think?
I think the positive image, frankly, is that, Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands, we're green enough, right? We have done a lot to make our world a much greener place, and we need to worry about the rest of the world, right? I mean, there's a real strong sense of the green getting greener and the tools and technologies and systems and habits that can sort of transform the lives of those who are frankly, not really very vulnerable, right? And I think so. There's a real need. I mean, one of the debates after the Biennale opened, 𝗙𝗲𝗀𝗃𝗃 was quoted as saying that it's too late for mitigation, right? And the sort of the role of architecture is through the adaptation to climate change and sort of making people's lives adjust and smooth the transition. And so I think there's a lot to push back on that. I think our project was trying to suggest that reducing energy demand and reducing dependence upon air conditioning, which one could see as both adaptation and mitigation. But of course, the third sort of pillar, if you will, of the IPCC tool is loss and damage, right? And just this sort of basic sense that those who are suffering the most are those who have benefited the least, right? And so, so much of what we're doing in the West and the over-carbonized economies is just kind of polishing our sort of existing systems, right? I mean, we need to really look at the bigger problem.
Mm-hmm. Bilge, I know at the university you are developing a new kind of thinking about buildings and especially about facades. That means about the transition between the outside and the inside. Could this be a positive image that people in the building and construction industry could look towards to develop the respective concepts and products?
Actually, it's just one of the examples that we're exploring at the moment. We call it mid-doors. So it's not indoor, it's not outdoor, it's mid. It's both at the same time. It's trying to get rid of this binary one single line on a plan or a section, which is the facade, and then it separates the indoor and outdoor into perfectly distinct spaces. Sorry. And what the mid-door concept is trying to do is basically shattering this one single line into different zones. And basically we're trying to embody that exposure to the uncontrolled natural world, the outdoors, as part of the architectural spatial design. It's not just that we have this enclosed box. As architects, this is our job. We create this perfectly designed glass box, and then we're going to condition it. We're going to create the most comfortable environment for it in that thing. But whatever happens outside, it's not my problem as an architect. So we're trying to get rid of that binary way of thinking, indoor, outdoor. We're trying to blur the lines a little bit.
That's a fantastic example, Bilge. It helps to open our eyes to the possibilities of architecture in general and applies not only to facades, it shows a creativity that can be applied to all areas of our built environment. Today, we began by talking about comfort as a cultural phenomenon. What we see now is that we need a discussion in society and architecture about the right balance of comfort and discomfort as a starting point for new architectural visions and practices. Thank you, Bilge, Dehlia, and Daniel, for sharing your insights. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Terms and Conditions, the Transsolar podcast, brought to you by Transsolar Energietechnik and TUM, Chair of Building Technology and Climate Responsive Design. Production by Prösler Studio. Next time, Jochen Lahm and DGNB's Christine Lemaitre discuss Shift, a new international initiative to walk the talk for climate-sensitive architecture.